Welcome back to Susan is Craft. In segment 3, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we're going to look at the patchwork block Dresden plate. This is a Dresden plate, sometimes known as the sunflower block because of its pointy ends. Dresden plate was a patchwork block that became very popular in the 1930s because of the Depression, people needing to use up all their scraps of fabric. This is a great block for utilising up all your scraps of fabric. And you can make the template any size and still obtain the same effect. As I mentioned, this block is actually made out of men's ties. What I've done is wash the ties first, get them from the op shop or raid someone's wardrobe, wash them, then unpick them and cut them down to size. What we're going to be using, the template size that I've used is this size. Now, often when you're cutting out your pieces with paper patterns, they do get very raggy after a while. So what we like to do is cut them out in template plastic. As I showed earlier in the program, template plastic, frosty, but it's great to see patterns underneath with. So what I do is place my pattern piece underneath the template plastic and then trace it with a soft HB pencil. So I've actually cut one out here and therefore I've cut out my pattern piece. This is the shape that you need, very easy to work with. I'll just fold it in half so we can create the top part of the piece. I'll just pin it. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in the show, all our seams tend to be 1/4 of an inch. I've set my sewing machine needle position to 1/4 of an inch and we'll just sew it. So pop it underneath the foot, just make sure that the needle is over. Now all we need to do is a straight stitch at a normal size. I've got mine on about 2.5, and we just go straight ahead. Now as I come up to the end, because this is going to be the underneath part here, what I'm going to do is just go backwards and secure the stitch, and then we'll come forward again. And that's all the sewing I need to do for this piece. Just tie off the ends, cut off the ends. Now, so I can turn it through and get the perfect point, I'm just going to snip it off at the angle here. There we go. Now we'll just turn it through. And there we go. We've created our little segment. I'll just finger press it. Often when you've got small pieces and you don't want to get out the iron, doing what they call finger pressing is more than sufficient to hold the piece in place while you sew it together. So we've got 2 pieces already sewn together. I'm going to sew the next piece on. So what I'll do is I'll actually using my quilting pins because they'll help the piece stay in place more securely because of their length. I'll just pin it in place. Again, we're going to use the 1/4 inch seam. I'll just pin it, pop it under the machine. I've got it set on a straight stitch and at a 1/4 inch mark, and we'll just sew down. Now I'm only going to go down a few stitches and then I'm going to go backwards so I can secure the end, and then we'll come forward again and just sew right down to the very end. Also bear in mind, if you've got pins holding your pieces together, as you're sewing, try not to hit the pins with your needle because that will over time upset the top tension of your sewing machine, which means you'll end up having to take it in for servicing more often, thus costing you more money. So here we go, we've successfully sewn another piece to create our patchwork piece, Dresden plate. Also, another way of putting your pieces together, once you've completed your full circle, in this piece here, I've actually used the buttonhole stitch on my sewing machine and I've sewn around the outer edge. So rather than hand sew, which can take a bit of time, as you can see this piece has been hand sewn onto the backing, you can actually machine stitch and I'll do it in about 1/4 of the time. Another fun thing to do with the segments of a Dresden plate, this is ideal to go around a Christmas tree. You could probably do it in Christmas fabrics as well. With the pattern, you might like to have a smaller circle, so you could easily elongate the length of this piece and have a much smaller circle to go around a Christmas tree. So it's a fun block to play around with. do think of having a go at utilising this, refer to our blog for the pattern pieces and have fun constructing a Dresden plate. Quick technique that you might like to utilise, as you might have noticed with our Dresden plate tree skirt, on the back of it, I've actually bound it with some bias binding. Now, sometimes when you're utilising binding, you can't always find the right coloured binding to match your project. So I thought I'd just very quickly show you how you can cut your binding so you can match up all your projects. Now, I've got some fabric here. We've got it on the fold, so we've found the straight grain of the fabric, and we also know the straight grain goes down and it also goes along. What I need to do is even it off, which I shall do with my rotary cutter and my cutting ruler, lining up the ruler, the black lines along the fold of the fabric. I'm just going to cut along the edge here, and I want to do that to the other side as well. So I'm going to turn my board around, saves me disrupting the fabric and unsettling the layers of fabric. So I'll just measure off here, cut it off. Now also, to complete the eveningness of this fabric, I'm going to go this way, and what I'll do is very carefully lift up my fabric and just fold it in half, and I'm just going to cut off this end so we'll have a nice even square. Here we go. Now, the beauty, one of the characteristics of bias binding is that it does have a certain amount of give on it. And the reason it's got the give is because we've cut the fabric on the bias. Now, as I've mentioned before, the straight grains this way and this way, our bias is actually going across the fabric, and that's what gives us the stretch. So what we need to do first of all is cut across. Now I'm going to turn the board around so I can access this edge a lot easier. And I'd like to make my binding, I think I'll make it 2 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is line up my ruler. Actually, I might go for 1.5 inches, I think. So I've lined up my ruler on the 1.5 inch mark with my rotary cutter. I'm just going to cut the ends, and I'll actually start down here as well. There's a little bit that's been missed, so we'll just cut that with our scissors. There we go. So we've got a piece of bias binding, and you can see there is a certain amount of give in it. So that means that when I pin it around a circle edge, it will give and actually flow with the shape of the fabric or the constructed pieces. So that is a great way to make your binding. To finish it off, what we need to do is with our iron, just fold the edges in to halfway, and we've created our bias binding. So do give it a go. It's a great way to make sure that you can coordinate your project with all the same coloured fabrics.